Welcome to the Law School Strategy Podcast, your weekly home for tips, advice, exclusive interviews, and other insights into landing that coveted legal job by graduation. We're here to help every law student develop their law school strategy. Don't go through law school blind. It's time to get out of the classroom, put your books down, and finish that outline later. Now, here's your host, Franklin Graves.
Hi, welcome to another episode. It's probably an exciting week for some of you because you're done with law school exams. Now, there might be a couple of you that still have some left, but either way, you're almost there. You're one step closer to graduation. And those of you that are graduating, congratulations to you. I hope that you have a bar prep program you're taking advantage of this summer and putting aside the job search or already have a job lined up. Either way, focus on the bar exam. So, sorry, I just realized that's probably a lot of pressure. I'm not meaning to put pressure on you. I'm just saying focus on the bar exam because that's your priority number one right now. If you don't have a job or if you already have a job lined up, then don't worry about that. Put it to the side. Either way, you've got time to find a job after the bar exam. This week is also my birthday. I'm not just going to make it about me. Don't worry. That's the only mention I'm going to have of it. It's exciting because I'm almost 30. I'm not quite 30, but I'm getting closer. So either way, I'm excited later on to share an interview with a sports law attorney here from Nashville, Tennessee. He is also an adjunct professor, and he's doing some great things with a blog that he runs, as well as just being a pretty awesome example of what to do on social media. We're going to talk and hear about how he graduated from law school with a job and what he's doing now as well. Spoiler alert, he recently started and launched his own sports law firm. Before we get to that interview, I do want to talk to you about a recent article that I published over on the ABA's Before the Bar blog. So it's about in-house counsel jobs after graduation. And I've talked about this before. I've interviewed some young lawyers that obtained their jobs right after law school that were in-house, working with a corporation or for a company, either whether they were general counsel or whether they were below and part of a larger legal team within an organization. But either way, in the article, I highly suggest you read it. No bias here. I talk about how it is possible to get an in-house job after law school. So some of the things that I talk about, I explain how I got my job, which I've done before on this show. So if you've listened to that episode, you already know some of that. But I talk about some tips and some strategies to use and kind of what to expect with a in-house job and whether you're going to be getting one or not. And I provide some advice and some tips. And if you're still in law school, it's the perfect time to try to get that internship in an in-house position, because that's really going to line you up and make you in a position to show your value and to show how much that organization needs you and should keep you around after law school, after you graduate. So if you don't have an in-house position, if you don't have an in-house internship, and you're still a law student, and you're looking to go in-house right after school, that's really going to be one of your easiest and best bets, easiest ways and best bets to get there. So I talk about that in the article. And then I also have like a small recap of my interview with a former guest on this show, Tony Stimson. He is a young lawyer that currently serves as a senior corporate counsel for a company in Tampa, Florida. I thought that his approach to finding an in-house job after law school was pretty unique and kind of an interesting way that some other law students might be able to replicate, or recent grads could replicate. You can read more about it in the article, but I write out about how he shares his story of actually looking for paralegal openings at a company and reading the description. And a lot of times he found that they were actually looking for an attorney. And he ended up mentioning this in one of his interviews and got hired. And he got hired into not a paralegal role that was open, but an actual entry-level attorney position at a company. So that's one very creative way to go about finding that first in-house legal job that can kind of set you on the career path to continue in-house. But then I also talk about the other side of the coin, where an experienced attorney was on one of the Legal Talk Network podcast shows that I listened to called the In-House Legal Podcast. And this attorney was talking about how a lot of companies may or may not be set up to handle a recent graduate right out of law school because they don't have a formalized program that you would more than likely find at a traditional law firm position right after school. But there is also a growing trend towards more companies recognizing the fact that having more in-house attorneys on staff can help reduce the cost of legal expense with external law firms and outside law firms that might be hired. And then a good example and kind of insight into this is back in 2010 when HP launched a program for first-year associates in-house. And so it was kind of like they took the model of having the law firm associate first-year programs of training and all that kind of program that you go through, but put it into an in-house environment. So that was kind of interesting to explore that. But then I also talk about if you do and find yourself ending up in-house with a not large legal firm or maybe the sole attorney in an organization like I was, I talk about how you can also find resources to kind of build your own associates program, where you can learn more about the business side of things using online courses like iTunes U or Coursera or lynda.com. So there are resources available if you do find yourself in-house and not necessarily part of a larger corporate structure that supports a brand new attorney or somebody right out of law school. So check that out. I put the link down in the description below or in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast. So check that out. It's over at the ABA law student blog called Before the Bar. So now, without further ado, let's go ahead and kick it over to my interview with Dan Worley. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time to talk today. I'm excited to have you on and hear about how you graduated from law school with a job. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with the first question. Where did you go to law school, and why did you end up going to law school to begin with?
Well, first off, thank you very much for having me. This is, I think your podcast does a great service to law students, and I think it goes a long way talking to the practicing lawyer. One thing, when I was in law school and before law school, like having a service like this would have been amazing. So thank you for doing that. So I went to 2 law schools, actually. I am one of the transfer students that your audience may or may not have heard of. I'm sure they probably have. But I guess let's take a step back first. I wanted to go to law school. Why did I want to go to law school? I was a junior in undergrad at Miami University, Miami, Ohio. I've always been kind of a sports nut. My dad's a coach, just kind of always a big part of my life. So I knew I wanted to work in sports. I was a sports management major there. And, at that point, I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't have an internship lined up that was going to lead to a job. And so I was started to think about some other options. I had some friends who were considering law school. So I was like, all right, well, maybe this law school thing sounds kind of cool. So I took a business law class my junior year, and I really liked it. And it was something that felt out of my wheelhouse, but really interesting. And so I ended up making that my minor and doing some more classes. And then one thing led to another, and I was taking the LSAT and went on from there with the idea in the back of my head that sports was going to continue to be a big part of that. So that kind of leads into where I'm at with sports legal stuff. So that's where I went. I went immediately to the John Marshall Law School in Chicago. There's a few of them around the country, but John Marshall is a really good regional law school in Chicago. It's actually the biggest law school in Chicago. Does a great job of placing people in that area. I was fortunate enough to, I think I got really serious, and I did something that I think really helped me. I took this law school boot camp a week before law school started, and it really helped me kind of hit the ground running. I did very well my first year there, and had some transfer opportunities, and ended up transferring to Georgetown in DC. So then I finished up law school at Georgetown.
What was it like being a transfer student? I know you kind of hinted at that, but tell me a little bit more about that process.
It was interesting. It's on one hand, it's like the cheat code of law school, because you get this huge ratings bump, quote unquote, in your law school and whatever. And that it really does open a lot of doors. I'm not going to lie. There was a lot more opportunities coming from a school like Georgetown, which is not only a very highly rated school, but also it's just a really big law school. So they have a huge alumni network. People come there from all over, so they're spread out all over. So if you want to practice in a different state, it opens a lot of doors on that front. But it's not without its drawbacks. I mean, you work your tail off as a 1L, and then they basically erase your grades, and you walk in with a 0 GPA. And you have to kind of earn that back all over again, which is a little frustrating when as I'm sure many of your listeners have gone through the 1L rigors. And also, there's schools will tell you that there's not, but there's some sort of stigma that's attached to transfer students at law schools. And, I didn't find that to be really an issue at all, but it's there. And I think for some people, it can be an issue. And, you kind of have to go about making friends all over again. And I found at least that 1L in law school really galvanizes groups of friends together. And those are the people that you probably mostly stay friends with throughout law school. So when you're coming in basically as a 2L, you're kind of on the outside looking into all those groups. Fortunately, Georgetown takes a pretty good sized transfer class. So a lot of my friends ended up being actually other transfer students as I slowly kind of integrated into the quote unquote general population of Georgetown law. So it was experience, and I'm sure we'll get to this in a minute, but the whole kind of job hunt process as well is interesting because you're doing your on-campus interviews. I did I think like 25 interviews at Georgetown before I had even stepped foot in a classroom. So that was kind of awkward when you're like saying that you go there, but you haven't really even taken a class there yet. So it's definitely a different process, but one that was beneficial for me.
If there was a law student that you were talking with and they were kind of asking you a question of like, would you recommend they transfer somewhere? What would you tell them? Like, it sounds like you kind of would advise it, but with a little bit of hesitation. What would be something you would tell them to consider before they do that?
Yeah, I think it depends, and it's an individual basis. Usually you would transfer to a higher rated school, which in theory would open more doors. Not necessarily true, depending on what market you wanted to work in. If you were already going to the best law school in an area, it's not really going to make that big of a difference. A lot of times if you do well your first year of law school, your current school will offer you a scholarship moving forward. That's probably not going to happen if you're going to transfer. So, there's different considerations to take. For me, for someone in my situation, it was kind of, I had a hard time with it, to be honest, because I had like all my friends. I was from Chicago, so I was like, oh, well, I'd probably end up there. But looking back, it should have been kind of a no-brainer, just as far as sort of the opportunities that were presented once I transferred. But I would say the majority of times, if you're making a pretty significant ratings jump, that it's probably a good idea. But it would be kind of on a case-by-case basis, I would say.
Great. Yeah. And I think another consideration also is the fact that it's going to be on your resume and you have to explain it if it comes up. Did you ever find it coming up during interviews?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was interviewing, like I said, on campus interviews, it was kind of a touchy subject. Or not, I wouldn't say touchy. It was just like, something that they would all ask about, because they were like, well, you went here and now you're coming here. Like, why did you do that? And there's a perfectly good answer to that question, and you just gonna have to be ready for it. I found that after I don't like list John Marshall on my resume anymore, just because I graduated from Georgetown, oh man, I'm getting old. 9 years ago or something. So it's just kind of not relevant anymore. But at the same time, yeah, that certainly, especially for like an entry-level job, is something that you have to be kind of ready to explain.
Okay, now let's move on to the question that everybody wants to know and why a lot of people listen. Did you graduate from law school with a job? And if so, how did you do it?
I did, yeah. I did it, like I mentioned, I did on-campus interviews the week before 2L of law school. I was extremely lucky to come into those interviews. I did it in 2007. That was right before the recession, 2008. So the market was booming. Big law firms were wining and dining everybody. Every law firm in the country was coming to our OCI days. We had they rent out this giant hotel in DC, and they have like 20 floors of people all over the country. And you're like racing up flights of stairs to get to the next interview. And it's like, it's kind of a wild scene, actually. It's very, very stressful for some people. So there's some good stories that come out of that. But anyway, I did. So I ended up interviewing with a few firms in Chicago. I kind of had my connections there. I was new to DC, didn't know what to expect. So I interviewed mostly at Chicago-based firms, and really hit it off with the firm and a few of the partners and associates at a firm called Drinker Biddle, which is a Philly-based firm. It's a big firm, but kind of not like a huge Mondo firm. It's more like in the middle of the AMLA 100 rankings. Has kind of a less intense feel about it than some of the other ones, which sort of fit my personality. And again, kind of like one or two partners there that I was just like immediately on the same page with, rather as opposed to some other firms where it felt forced. So I feel like so blessed that, and I feel almost like I didn't earn it that much, because I talk to a lot of law students now and try to give advice, and I know the job market's a lot different. But basically I had my job, before my 2L year, as long as I didn't completely screw up my summer associate year, which fortunately I didn't, and was able to go there, did the summer associate, got an offer, and then started after graduation.
Yeah, it seems like that's a path that not as many students are taking, but it still is an option for some of the students that might be in the top 10% of their class or something. So very relevant for some, but like you said, for others maybe not. So tell me a little bit about. So you started out after law school, you took the bar exam, I'm assuming, and then you passed, and then you just started working immediately after that at the law firm.
Yeah. So like I said, I summered during a very, very good time as far as economy goes, but immediately after that, while I was a 3L in law school, like the legal market went to hell, and there were people who were being laid off. They were laying off staff, lawyers, and it got to a point where in the spring of 2009, all of my classmates, because many of the students at Georgetown end up going to big law, so I would say a lot of people were in that same position as me. We're just kind of waiting for a phone call or an email or a letter saying what your future is going to be. I had friends that had been offered full-time employment the summer before, just completely revoked. I had friends who were told to go away for a year, basically. One of my good friends from law school who transferred with me was just paid $80,000 to take a year off, which I thought was like the most amazing thing ever.
Can we all do that?
I know.
Let's all try to do that.
I'm up for that. So there was all these different options, and Drinker, like, I did a very kind of unique thing among law firms, and they actually started us right on time. So I started in September, which is on the early side for big firms that after taking the bar. But they put us through a mandatory 6-month training program where we didn't bill an hour for 6 months. So we did, depending on what practice group you were in, well, they did 2 months of like all firm training. So you would do things that would be similar to all practice groups and work on some soft skills. And they were run by consultants. They were run by partners at the law firms. Really, really great commitment by the firm. And then the next 2 months were more focused on your actual practice group. So I came in as a litigator. So we worked on basically all stages of building up to a trial and then through a trial. And then the last 2 months, we kind of slowly integrated into billable work and did a lot of shadowing work, and had some other projects as well. So I think that was kind of a unique experience. There wasn't really firms doing that at the time. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to get that additional training. Although I will say at the time, having gone through 3 years of law school, you're very ready to kind of get in the mix and actually practice. And so it was a little frustrating to have to be like, I have to do 6 months more of basically school. But in hindsight, it was a very valuable time.
Excellent. So let's kind of fast forward a little bit after that. You're working at the firm. I guess I already know the answer, but so tell me about the time when you started to change to a different firm. What did that process look like?
Yeah,
how did you do that?
Again, like I think I walked into a really good situation at Drinker and had a lot of great relationships with people. And the work was good. It was very high profile. I was, helping out big cases as much as you can as sort of a young associate. But at the same time, like in the back of my head, I had this like big sports itch, right? That was like always there. And I had like a case or two at Drinker that like touched on it, but it really wasn't part of my practice. So I started kind of looking around, thinking like, okay, maybe there's something else out there that I can do, that I can like transfer the skills that I've worked on and work in sports or work with sports. And so I had an opportunity to interview with another law firm, a little bit bigger, but similar size, their Chicago office, called Foley and Lardner. And Foley has a very established and well-known sports industry team. It's called a group of lawyers within them that are litigators, business lawyers, IP lawyers, you name it, but all work with sports industry clients. So I interviewed there, was fortunate enough to be offered a position in their litigation group, and decided, I think I had been a drinker for about 3 years at that point, and decided that that was a good time to make that transition, to try to get more percentage of my work being in the sports field.
Excellent. So was it mostly mutual connections that kind of helped you get that, or your reputation?
Honestly, I got called by a headhunter, and I knew about Foley, and I had some connections of friends that were like kind of high level associates there that, so I got called by a headhunter who was like, hey, they're looking for someone with your experience. I don't even think they knew about the sports part, but I was like, well, I'm interested in their sports stuff. I know they have this great team. I would consider talking to them if that was like on the table. And so we talked, and they said, yes, you can do some of that. But then I was kind of connected with some other lawyers too. So I think for me to get the interview, it was probably the headhunter piece, but maybe for me to land the job, I think had a lot to do with some other mutual connections, because then I like touched base with those people and felt comfortable with them. And I think they probably, at least I hope, felt comfortable with me, which really helped seal the deal, because having been, while I was at Foley, I was part of the recruiting team, and those lateral positions are very competitive. I think the practice group that I went into had only taken like one person in the last 4 years. So it was more to do with the personality connection that I had with some of those people, rather than just like, the ink on my resume. So I think that sort of hopefully answers your question with how that went.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So as a recruiter, that whole process, but then also you mentioned that you also went through your own vetting process, reaching out to associates or partners or the people at the firm that you already were connected with. And so it must have been just an unnerving process to think and have to go through that of wondering, like, am I making the right decision by leaving where I'm already comfortable, I'm already established, and kind of have a routine, to something that's going to be completely different and new. And can you kind of describe that process? Because I know some of our listeners might be on the fence about making a lateral move even. So can you kind of give some insights and ways to overcome those doubts or questions to even ask? It sounds like you had some good questions to ask from your experience on the recruiting side.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely important. And obviously, I was fortunate to be in a position where I, had a job, and I was sort of like looking for something that better fitted what I wanted to do. I obviously there may not be if someone is just looking for their first job, for example, or, unemployed at the time and looking for a job, maybe they're not in the same position, but, to the extent that you are, and in any event, I think it's really important to kind of vet, who you're going to be working for, what's the type of work you're going to be doing, what are the hours like, just to make sure it's a good fit. Because I won't name names, but a good friend of mine actually just had a great in-house legal job and took another great, on paper, great in-house legal job, and then got there and realized that he didn't really mesh with sort of the one person that he was going to be working most closely with, is like essentially his boss. Their personalities just weren't great, and that this other boss had kind of a history of not getting along with people. And so he was kind of walking in blind to that. Some of the things I would suggest are, I wouldn't worry about that through the interview process, up until they offer you the job. I know that once you kind of get to the point where you're offered the job, the tables kind of turn. I mean, I would be thinking about that through the job process, but be more concerned with selling yourself as a candidate. But then once they offer the job, I think it's totally fair game to be like, hey, like I would love to like grab lunch or coffee with the people I'm going to work with, and like kind of get to know them better to make sure that we're a good fit, and like, or maybe talk to them about specifically what the work's going to be like. Because really, like, it's in the employer and the employee's best interest to have a good fit, because they want you to be there for a long time. They want you to be happy. So I think those are totally fair questions. Just be a little careful about the timing. If you're especially if you're talking like, I think personally, like work-life balance is a big issue, and you want to be comfortable. I work extremely hard, but I've seen people get burnt out. I just don't want to be put in that situation. But maybe you don't want to ask that question during the initial interview process because they might look at you like, oh, this guy just wants to slack off. But once you've been offered the position and want to learn a little bit more about it, I think it's totally fair game, and employers would actually appreciate that.
I think there are definitely some lines of questions that might be premature to ask during that initial interview or even the second or third round of interviews that you go through. So great points. So let's kind of fast forward again and talk about what happens after this law firm. You kind of can you describe when did you start doing all the sports writing and launching your own website? Can you kind of dive into that next chapter of your life?
So I was at Foley then for like 3 years. Kind of got to the point where it was a really great experience. I had done a lot of the work that I wanted to do. I had some good friends there. Kind of, I don't know how to politically say this, but just kind of figured out long-term, maybe that wasn't the place for me, at least at this time. And my wife actually, who was just finishing up her PhD program, had an opportunity to actually joined the U.S. Army as a clinical psychologist, and it was kind of her dream job, and the timing was right on my end, and so we decided we're going to go down this path. And I didn't have a job lined up. I was like, we're going to do it. Fortunately, I had saved a little bit of money, so we had a little bit of grace room, a grace period, I guess you'd say, set up. And so I went in and I said, hey, listen, like I'm going to leave in like a month. This is what I'm doing. Thank you very much. And fortunately, they were like, well, that sucks. Would you want to stick on and work long distance? Because at this point, we knew that we were going to be moving to Augusta, Georgia, in the sticks a little bit for my wife's job. She was going to be located at Fort Gordon. And I was like, actually, yes, I would like to work remotely. And so I did that for about 8 months. It was actually a pretty wonderful experience because I got to work with kind of pick the cases out that I wanted to work on that I was litigating at the time. And one of my ideas then, I kind of knew we were going to be in Augusta for about 18 months. And I knew that I probably didn't want to look for permanent employment there because it was such short duration. I had a job for part of the time. But I knew I have always written. I actually started a blog before that called sportslaw101.com, which is RIP since gone. But I knew that I had wanted to have a little bit more time to really make a really great sports legal blog and to do some other things such as teach. And so when I got down there and I was working at Foley, I was kind of doing that in the background, kind of building it up. And then once the work at Foley kind of ended, which was 6 or 8 months later, I launched the blog and did a lot of writing, got a team of writers together. It's still going. I think it's a pretty great resource for sports people who work in the space or are interested in the space. We do a traditional blog with articles. We have a ton of like publicly available case filings, contracts, collective bargaining agreements. We have run a job board, all kinds of stuff. I suggest people interested in sports check it out. Podcast too. Did I mention a podcast? Yeah. And so I was doing that, and I ended up being able to teach a class called Arbitration in Sports at Charleston Law School, which was a blast. I had an awesome time. And then kind of in the background, I knew I wanted to get back into practicing. And so didn't really know how that was going to happen. We were actually still waiting to figure out where we're going to move to. And you kind of have to go where the military sends you, or Senior President Trump, I guess. And so fortunately, we were able to move up here to Nashville with Franklin. So Franklin and I are just across town right now, about 2 months ago. And in the meantime, I was able to launch a small law firm here with a friend, colleague, Justin Sievert, in the law firm's called Sievert Worley. and we're off to a good start there. So that's sort of the path to where I am today.
So I'll definitely drop in links to both your blog and your podcast down below. Nice. So if you're watching on YouTube, just check the description below. And then if you're listening to the podcast, you can check the show notes, and I'll drop the links in there as well. Okay, so great. So quite a lot to dissect there. The writing and the adjunct teaching obviously speak to themselves, but the aspect that I want to kind of hit on is starting your own firm. First of all, why did you do that? You mentioned, you touched on it a little bit, that you kind of wanted to get back into the practice of law. So you're kind of, I guess you were missing out on that. But what was the purpose of going solo, but then also bringing in another partner? Can you kind of describe all the thought and mind and planning, I guess, that went into that?
It's been a really big undertaking. I think more so than we even thought going into it. Like, you can go online and like Google. Actually, the ABA is like the best resource for information on like what to do if you like want to start your own small firm or solo practice or whatever. But really, I think it came down to like Justin and I have like a lot in common as far as experience in practice, interests. So I think we were a good match off the bat. But from my perspective, I wanted to be in control of my career. I've had enough experience now where I feel comfortable being the one in charge of the legal work that I'm putting out. That wouldn't have been the case earlier on in my legal career, I don't think, but I've been practicing long enough where I feel that way. And so I still want to do some of this other stuff and also have the practice. So I can really control it now, how, market to clients that I want to work with, do the kind of work that I'm interested in. And it's been a challenge, certainly, so far, but also been like extremely rewarding. And I think part of me, I've like kind of always had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And so that has really driven me into make sort of like the legal work I'm doing now. And it's not that it didn't feel rewarding before, but it feels like way more rewarding now, just because it's like, I had to bring in this client, I had to get this work, and I have to do it. And it's like my reputation's on the line. And so that part's been super awesome. I think like the whole like rigmarole of setting up the firm, figuring out all the ethics requirements, building a website, doing all the social media stuff like that was more work than I thought. But we were trying to do it the right way as much as possible. So it took a while. But everything is up and running now, and so far so good.
Sports law is a very popular topic, and a lot of current law students want to get into it and don't really know how or what it actually, in some cases, not even sure what exactly sports law entails. So you're heavily involved, I know, with the ABA forum on the entertainment and sports industries, and you obviously have your blog that you mentioned, and you do a lot of writing and podcasting. So can you kind of give some starting points to law students that might be interested, or even practicing attorneys that might be interested in expanding into a field they might be more passionate about in sports law? Can you kind of give some insights into that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so just to kind of start at the beginning there, sports law, what is it? To me, it's wherever the sports industry intersects with the law. So really it covers almost the full gamut of other kinds of law. It just has how it applies to quote unquote sports clients, whether that's corporations, teams, leagues, athletes, you name it. I mean, it kind of goes across the board. So it's definitely broader than I think many people think it is. I think when people like originally think like, oh, sports law, that means like being general counsel of a team or working in a league office or something like that. And I think it's broader than that. There's a lot more going on when you really kind of dig in. There's a lot of different areas. So that being said, I mean, there's plenty of opportunity to get involved in different aspects of it. I will say, I think it is extraordinarily competitive. Jobs that are posted regularly get, hundreds, maybe even thousands of applications because people love it and they want to do something that they love. And, but on the flip side of that, it's also a very small world. Being kind of connected into the industry, you'll find that the people that are really, they like to hire within themselves. They, if you start going to the events or being involved in these various groups, you'll start seeing the same people over and over that are really the ones that are maybe not just want to do it, but are passionate about it. I think there's a difference there. I get a ton. I mean, I literally get emails or calls every week from people saying, "Well, how can I break in, or what should I be doing?" And I have a lot of tips, but I think that the first thing is you have to be really dedicated to wanting to do it. And then the first tip that I give after that is really make yourself an expert in what it is that you do. So like I said, like any part of the law applied to the sports industry is, so if you can make yourself really good at that area of law, even if it's not while working in the sports industry or doing quote unquote sports law, you're going to be very marketable to that, job that opens up that is looking for someone with your skill set. So that's literally the exact path that I took, right? I went in and worked at a firm, got the experience, and then when an opportunity arose, I was able to transition into a role that had more sports work. So that's one of the things that I say. And then obviously, and I've kind of alluded to this already, the network issue is a huge deal. There's a lot of great networking opportunities. So like you said, I'm the vice chair of the American Bar Association sports division, and we have 2 to 3, depending if you count video games as one of them, but 2 conferences every year that go on. We just had one in Miami, and then the big one is this fall in Las Vegas. It's a sport and entertainment law conference. Those are great opportunities to go to meet people face to face. There's many of the biggest people in the industry go to these either as speakers or as attendees. And then another fantastic group, which I'm also involved in, is the Sports Lawyers Association, which is the most established group in this field. And they have an event in May. This year it's in Denver. It's a 3-day conference. And it's really like the who's who of sports law. Everyone is very friendly. They're open to networking. I mean, get there, do it. And then in every region, there's also events. SLA and now ABA2 does these outreach events in big cities, which are like, a panel or something and networking. And then, I've noticed there's also many local bar organizations that do similar things. And, I think another big advantage of being part of these groups are that you get access to their members' information and other people that are interested. So I can literally go on the SLA's website, put in Nashville, and see the other 10 or 15 people that are SLA members in my area and have their emails and phone numbers. And I have zero shame of just emailing them and be like, hey, I'm interested in sports law. Like, I know you work here or you do it too. Like, would you just want to meet up for coffee sometime so I can introduce myself and get on their radar? And like I said, it's kind of a small world. So you're going to be seeing these people again and again. And there may be ways that you can help them out later or they can help you out. So it's good to just kind of put a face to the name and really get out there and meet them. So, I mean, I would suggest really doing your best you can to network in the industry and not only do like the initial meet, but really like learn. I can't have said this enough for young lawyers, 'cause it's something that I was terrible at that I'm hopefully getting better at, is to really learn how to network, and not only that first interaction, but really make sure that you're following up with people that you're trying to, keep them in mind for things that you might be involved in, or make sure that, you're on their radar so they're keeping you in mind too. I can't tell you how many jobs in sports law go unposted completely, and they're just filled by people in other people's networks. And what I've seen happen is, for example, like GCO sports teams will reach out to people that they know and be like, hey, do you have any like really good candidates? Like, I'm looking for someone with like 3 to 5 years experience. Like, I just don't want to sift through 1,000 resumes. Like, do you have people that you might know that would be interested? And they're not. And so like, even if you don't know that person, you may know someone in their network, and you may have a chance to get in on a job opening that's very limited in the number of applicants for it. So I can't emphasize enough in a hot, quote unquote, hot industry like sports law that you really focus on networking.
So you mentioned some great advice, first of all, in terms of the associations, networking. It's basically who you know a lot of times. But for maybe people that don't know where to go to find resources for like the latest news, or like for instance in the entertainment industry, I can immediately think of the Hollywood Reporter. They have a THR Esquire section that is always posting insights and exclusive kind of not leaks, but kind of just deal terms and that kind of stuff that you wouldn't normally hear about otherwise. So on the sports law section or the sports law side of the industry, can you kind of give some resources, I guess, in addition to your own blog and podcast, of some places that people can go for that kind of information just to stay abreast of issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the number one resource that I use is Twitter. There's a big sports law community on Twitter. And there's tons of people out there. Michael McCann is one of the most popular. My law school sports law professor, Andrew Brandt, is a good one. The sports law blog, Warren Zola, Gabe Feldman, my podcast co-host, Daniel Wallach. Those are all great people on Twitter, and I'm missing a ton, so I apologize if people are listening. And as far as websites go, the sort of grandfather, the one that's been around and it's fantastic and it always has been, is the sports law blog. And it has a bunch of various sports law writers on it. Michael McCann, as I mentioned before, writes for SI. He does great work. My blog, thewhitebronco.com, has a lot of various resources on it. There's a group of attorneys that graduated from Tulane who run one called the Sports Esquires, which is a fantastic resource. Particularly a guy named Ian Gunn, who does every week he puts out sports law links, which is just links to the top sports law stories from the past week, which is a really good way to kind of keep abreast of the most popular issues going on. And then in addition to that, like the SLA has some document databases and things like that. I don't use that too frequently because I've just have my own that I've built up over time, but there's plenty of that out there. And there's plenty of opportunities and other blogs and podcasts to keep track of. And sort of another tip and I'm transitioning now, but another tip that I like to say, especially for folks who are maybe outside of the sports legal industry, either whether they're young lawyers or law students, but really try to write. It's such a way to show your knowledge, and write good stuff. I'm of the opinion that law students, young lawyers are all very, very smart, and they when they put their mind to it, they can do that. And find resources that'll publish you. I know a lot of these blogs will do that. They're looking for content. They're looking for people to come in and write good stuff. It's a great way to show that you have a high level of knowledge about a topic that maybe you're not working in. So when you're applying for that sports law job, they can look at your resume and say, well, he has all the soft skills of working in contracts at this law firm, and he's written about these sports law issues, so he knows about the sports law industry, even if they haven't directly worked in there. I think that's super important and really shows a commitment and passion to wanting to work in the industry.
That makes perfect sense too. I mean, because if you're breaking into an industry, you kind of have to have some, at least, I guess, foot in the door to be able to talk about something. So writing and having the network connections obviously are two great starting points. You mentioned this briefly. You mentioned video games. So can you, like, I guess in a very short, because I don't want to derail this entire conversation too much, but esports and sports, can you kind of talk about the difference from your perspective on whether somebody like you would be willing or able to take on a client that is in the esports arena rather than the traditional sports sector?
I mean, I think that the esports world, first off, I think it's a really great place for younger lawyers to get involved in, because I think a lot of us old ones, I'm including myself, are like, it's kind of over their head. Like, this is a new technology, this is a new phenomenon. Like, I don't totally get it. Like, and I do now, but I was at a point where I was like, is this really a thing? And I've seen a handful of young lawyers like really scoop in and that know the industry, that know the legal issues, that can come in and really capitalize and really build a practice around it. I don't think it really differs that much from sports in the sense that as long as you can learn the industry, the legal work is very similar. There's definitely some different compliance issues, and there's sort of this betting angle that's a little hazy right now. But at the core of it, you have to have these like core legal knowledge of how to negotiate contracts or venue agreements or whatever it may be in the industry. And those are really not dissimilar from the traditional quote unquote sports space.
Great. I definitely, like I said, I don't want to derail too much. So let's get back on a little bit back on
Sure.
topic. So back to law school. Was there ever a time that you struggled or faced any challenges either throughout the law school process or during the job search process that you can share?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I feel like so fortunate that I kind of, the first time I was really trying for a job, I got it. And that, that success didn't continue throughout my career. So I think it makes more sense for me to talk about maybe like as a young lawyer, particularly the time, like, when I was at Drinker Biddle, my first law firm, and I was like, oh man, this is great work, but like, I'm not passionate about it, and I need to like figure out what I'm passionate about. So like, it's like, all right, well, I'm going to start thinking about getting my resume together, interviewing other places. And, I had some experiences that weren't great. Like I got really close on a couple jobs. I actually went to, a sports organization and went and interviewed, and it went great. And I loved everybody. And like, I had a great dialogue. It was like, a third interview. I had left the state to go to a different state to travel there 2 times, and like taking time off, like made my life hell. And got a call that I was basically the second person, and didn't get the job, but they wanted me to interview again for another job, and like kind of gave a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like this is going to be the one for you. Went through the same process again, traveled out of state twice. 2 months later, was completely emotionally invested, didn't get the job, so it happens. Like, it's a hard thing to go through, I think. And like, and those are just examples. Like I didn't get many other jobs too, but, those are just kind of examples of like, it's just hard. Like you have to really kind of keep faith that, your career is going to work out the way you want. And if you're passionate about whatever area of law that you want to get into, and you keep working at it, I promise you it's going to work out eventually. And you just got to kind of put the time in and understand that it's a marathon and not a sprint, because, it's hard, especially I think as a young lawyer. You're like, oh, I'm not in my dream job yet. Oh, I'm not in exactly what I'm doing. This sucks. But at the same time, you have to understand, like, your career is really long. Like, I still feel like I'm in the beginning of my career right now. And, those experiences happened to me years and years ago. So, my advice would be continue working really hard, continue pursuing your passion, and be patient.
And yeah, I love how you said it's a marathon, not a sprint. That's very applicable. And I know it's very easy, especially as a law student, on that side of things, to get caught up in that world and feel that pressure of having to be at a certain point at a certain time after graduation. But yeah, let's kind of slow down and focus on where we are now, and kind of enjoy the moment as much as we can.
And don't compare yourself to your peers either. Like, I know that's like an easy trap to fall in, but like, if I learned anything in law school, it was that, especially like studying for the bar exam, like block out the white noise, like don't listen to people, just do what you need to do, and you'll be fine. With the job market, same way, like people get lucky, some people get unlucky, but eventually I found that it works out for everyone as long as you're, diligent and really doing what you need to do.
Yeah, totally. That's very good advice. Okay, so I think you kind of touched on this. I can go ahead and ask it, but
Sure.
Is there any advice? The way I typically phrase this last question is to put yourself in the shoes of somebody graduating May of 2017. What would you tell yourself as a current law student if you were in the shoes now? What would you looking back tell yourself?
I think at this point, if you're still looking for a job, continue just networking, using your school's career counselor as a resource, which I think is a really huge thing. I would take advantage of alumni from your school and really reach out to them, and don't ask them for a job, but like ask them for advice, and ask them if they've heard of anything. Usually I found that lawyers especially are always like willing and generous with their time and wanting to help and doing whatever they can, because they've all been in these positions before, and they really, know that helping someone out will come back and help them eventually too. So I would suggest those things to kind of younger law students, maybe ones that aren't on the verge of graduating and facing taking the bar, because that's obviously, I would suggest, June hits, just focus on the bar and worry about that stuff later, as hard as that is, if you don't have a job. But just make sure you kind of don't split your time there. But earlier law students, I mean, I think it's such a valuable time of your life that, like, this is the last time in your life that you're going to have sort of free time. You're going to have summer breaks, winter breaks. You're only in school really, even if you're going full time, you have time to have, I had jobs throughout law school. I know you all can do it. So maximize those times. Find ways to get involved. Find ways to do internships, externships. I would highly recommend any clinic that you can do, or any practical class. Like, if you want to be a transactional lawyer, like, take all the drafting classes your law school has. I think all of those things are way more helpful for you once you step out of the classroom to do during school. And if you're interested in an area like sports law that's a little niche-y, I would suggest not just looking for opportunities that are posted somewhere. Like, really join SLA, join the ABA group, find the contact list, reach out to those people in your area that you'd be interested in maybe working with or getting to know. Ask them if they're looking for interns ever, or if they know anyone else around the area that is. I know a ton of people have gotten jobs that way, and gotten internships that haven't been posted. So I think there's a ton of opportunity. You have a lot of free time, which is something that you'll soon not have. And I think you should try to take advantage of it to the fullest. And then also, like I said, like, do the other, once you graduate, become an expert. I have my notes here: network, publish things, and become involved in bar associations, which those 4 things are probably the same 4 things that every person that comes on Franklin's podcast here tells you. But I think that they are true.
It's very true. And even if it's repetitive, it takes a repetition to make things stick. So let's keep doing it.
That's true.
Perfect.
And Franklin, as you know, like, it's not like these things go away. It's not like, we do these every day. And it's just something that you kind of have to build into your career, build into your life. I'll tell you what, like, working in a big law firm, you go there and you're like, all right, now I'm set. I'm working in a big law firm. But you realize after practicing a few years, like, if I'm going to stay here and I'm going to be successful, I need to do all these things to start bringing in my own business, right? And they're the same skills. And so why not just start doing them now? Trust me, you're going to be way ahead of all your colleagues. You're going to be such a more valuable employee to your law firm, and you're going to be in a fantastic and less stressful spot moving forward. And who doesn't like, talking to other lawyers anyway?
Exactly. There's always room for improvement in whatever career path you're taking. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate you taking the time, and you've shared some really great insights and advice. But so if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you, follow up, ask you questions? What do you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, you can have a few. You can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Worley Sports Law. My email, our law firm website is sievertworley.com, and I have my email on there. You can also check out the White Bronco. I have my contact information up there. So I'm pretty out there on the internet if you want to hit me up. I think my email is even in my Twitter bio, so I don't hide too much. So I suggest, I'm happy to chat individually with people, anyone that's sort of looking at the industry. Just hit me up.
Awesome. Yeah, I try to avoid putting a email address just in the description or the show notes. So good to know. If somebody wants to find you, we'll put a link to your firm account or your firm website and your Twitter account in the description below, and also on the show notes. So great. Well, thank you again. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much, Franklin. I enjoyed it.
That wraps up up the show. Thank you so much for listening. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to listen and subscribe. Please subscribe. That really helps me out. If you click that little subscribe button, either on screen now or that button down below. Also, if you're listening through the podcast app, click that subscribe button and search for us on your favorite podcasting app, either iTunes, Podcast, or Overcast, Stitcher, Google Play Store. We're everywhere. Android, iOS, even BlackBerry. Don't know if any listeners use BlackBerry. If you do, please hit me up. I want to have you on the show to talk about your use of BlackBerry still. I do know one attorney that's using BlackBerry. Anyways, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. It helps me kind of grow the show and understand the network that I'm building here. If you're interested in being on the show, hit me up. If you want to talk about something interesting, I'm more than happy to have you on. Or if you want me to talk about something that you might have a question about, put it in the comments below, tweet it at me, or email me. I'm at Franklin Graves. You can also find us at Law School Strat. Law School Strategy, all already written out, was too long for Twitter. We're on Facebook. So yeah, hit us up anywhere and everywhere, and I will answer the question or get you booked on the show. Thanks for listening, and here we go to the outro.
Thanks for listening to the Law School Strategy Podcast. Check out lawschoolstrategy.com and make sure you subscribe to never miss an episode of the Law School Strategy Podcast. We're on all podcast apps and on YouTube, so leave a review. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Remember, nothing in this podcast should be considered legal advice. Please consult with an attorney on any legal issues you may be facing.